Hello, everybody. Sorry about taking so long to get in. My sharing was very slow today, and that is what created the problem. Hopefully, my computer will be more responsive now as we go forward, and things won't be quite so slow. In the meantime, hi, Dolores. How are you? Thanks for sharing. And a whole lot to you, Evelina. Claudette, and hello to you. Nice to see you again. And I'm sure there are a good many more of you here, but some of you might have gotten a bit impatient since I was longer than usual in sharing. Anyway, tonight, I want to start off with the fight in Minnesota between Ilhan Omar. Evelina says she can hear me, which reminds me, I better check on whether the system has inadvertently shifted me away from my Samsung mic, which it has. And so there I am. I'm back now. I hope you can hear me now, Evelina. You should be able to. Hi, Steve Gonzo. Nice to see you. Anyway, I want to start with Ilhan Omar and covering the battle she is having, in Minnesota. So let's start by sharing an article there. It was kindly supplied by Lana Dell. This is from the Minneapolis Post, I expect. It just says Min Post, but I gather it's the Minneapolis Post. And the article appeared, when did it appear? On July 10th. It's a Reuters article, so it's been around for a little while. It was by Gabe Schneider, who's a Minneapolis Post staff writer. And he says what Melton-Meaux' primary challenge to Ilhan Omar is all about. There's a picture of Ilhan. Looking very determined as usual. She usually looks like she's determined. She's a fighter. And in this photo, she was introducing then presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders at a campaign event in Nashua, New Hampshire. Funny that someone who's being attacked for being an anti-Semite was introducing and endorsing the Jewish candidate who had the best chance ever to become the first Jewish president in America. Just so happened that the anti-Semitite was endorsing and supporting, for all she was worth, the Jewish candidate who came the closest to becoming the president of the United States. Anyway, Melton-Meaux says he voted for Ilhan Omar in the 2018 general election. But now in 2020, Anton Melton-Meaux, a relatively unknown name in DFL politics, is challenging Omar in the DFL primary. That's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. On August 11th for her 5th congressional district seat. The seat formerly held by Keith Ellison, by the way. I always keep thinking, whenever I think of Keith Ellison, I also think of Ralph Ellison, the black writer of the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. Wonderful writer. Quote, I was hopeful that she would use her platform to do great work for the district, unquote. Melton-Meaux said of Representative Ilhan Omar's first term in Congress, but what I've seen since then is someone doesn't show up for votes and someone that doesn't show up for voters. She has one of the worst voter attendance in the United States House of Representatives, missing in 2019 alone 40 votes. And then in parens, Omar missed 5.7% of votes in 2019, putting her in a tie with 5 other members for the 55th most absent member of Congress. So she's far from the worst offender in the Congress in this respect, even for 2019. Omar's campaign says she missed votes due to personal reasons, including the death of a family member, that was her father, I believe, and that the votes were all procedural. I may be wrong about that. Her father may have died in 2020. I understand he died from COVID-19, so. But I'm not sure of my facts on that one, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, if the votes were all procedural rather than substantive, in 2020, so far, she has missed 2 votes, according to ProPublica. So not many votes missed at all in 2020 thus far, and we are through with most of 2020, since there are going to be an awful lot of recesses from now until the end. We're probably 3/4 of the way through 2020. While 2 candidates agree on many issues, they have important policy differences, including healthcare and the environment. But their biggest policy difference is related to an issue outside of the district, Israel. Now, I want to say right at this point, I'll interrupt going through the article, and say at this point, and I'm going to say this as a Jewish American who was well trained, well indoctrinated in my religion, went to Hebrew school until I was roughly 12 and a half, then had a private tutor to carry me through the bar mitzvah year, and then continued with my tutor discussing very advanced issues in Judaism until the time I went to college when I was 16. So I was well trained in Judaic issues. I was very supportive of Israel back then. Very much pro-Israel, and of course extremely proud to be Jewish, which I still am. So what I say as someone who was steeped in the tradition. Now I have to add that I am not a religious person. At this point in my life, I am what you would call, an agnostic. But back then, I was extremely interested, in Judaism, and extremely pro-Israel. I was never an anti-Semite. I was never a Jewish anti-Semite, as that term is sometimes applied to Jews. And I don't believe I'm a Jewish anti-Semite, but right now. So what I want to say is, as someone who knows a lot about the religion and about the history, of Judaism, that what I say going forward is with that kind, of background. First thing that I want to say is that this biggest policy difference of theirs, according to the Minneapolis Post, that is the difference over Israel, is not what I would call of paramount importance in choosing between these two candidates. I think the differences over health care and the differences over the environment are more important and should be more important to all of the constituents in the 5th district, the 5th congressional district, of Minnesota. If I were living in the 5th congressional district, I would not consider any policy differences they had over Israel to be the most important of their differences. I don't even know if I would consider it the 5th most important or the 6th most important. Why not? Because there's a big tradition in my growing up, and I believe in Judaism, and that tradition is a belief in justice, economic justice, social justice, climate justice, justice of all kinds. To me, justice is the central passion of Judaism. This sense of justice is what was given to the tradition of Judaism by Moses. To my mind, it is the most important thing in Judaism. More important than Israel. More important than the homeland itself. Because for American Jews, Israel may be a second homeland. But our homeland is the United States of America, thank you. Going forward, Omar is a formidable candidate. She is a progressive icon nationally and one of the most well-known Muslim politicians in the United States. She certainly is. In 2018, as a state representative, she was one of 3 Democrats considered serious contenders to replace now Attorney General Keith Ellison after he retired from Congress to run for his current job. In the August primary, Omar ran against former Minnesota House Speaker Margaret Anderson Kelleher and State Senator Patricia Torres Ray, while Anderson Kelleher ran a neck and neck or even bested Omar in some suburbs. She was trounced in the city of Minneapolis, where Omar got more than double Anderson Kelleher's votes. Ultimately, Omar earned 48% of the vote, compared to 30% for Anderson Kelleher and 13% for Torres Ray. Patricia Torres Ray. 3 women ran. The one who earned nearly 50% of the vote was Ilhan Omar. In Congress, Omar serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and as a whip of the Progressive Caucus, where she is seen as a potential future chair of the caucus, since there are usually co-chairs of the Progressive Caucus. At this point, she's more likely to be to be a future co-chair, but that's all right. As Representative Barbara Lee, the former chair of the Progressive Caucus, said last year, all the big issues that our Democratic caucus has embraced that really speak to our work for the people, she's helped pull together the votes for that. Omar is often portrayed by her opponents, including Melton-Meaux, as divisive, but her tenure is more complicated than that. And I would say that, okay, if she is divisive, then it's because of what she stands for. If you like what she stands for, it should not bother you that people who disagree with her on what she stands for find her divisive. I add that. The article says she has frequently been photographed by Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's side, that's true, and has co-sponsored a number of bills with other members of the House and Senate, including the Student Debt Cancellation Act of 2019, with Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, which would cancel student debt, the Civil Act with Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut, which would amend the Insurrection Act, curtail violations against civil liberties, and the Meals Act, a bill to provide school lunches during the coronavirus pandemic that was included in House Democrats' Families First Corona Response Act. Those are good positions on bills. I hope that Melton-Meaux doesn't disagree with her on those positions. But here we go. Before he was a candidate and before Melton-Meaux moved to Minnesota, he was a college student at Washington University in St. Louis, where he ran track and met his wife, Genevieve. Melton-Meaux attended the University of Virginia School of Law, where he went on to receive the Congressional Black Caucus Fellowship, working under Donna Brazile, former chair of the DNC, and Eleanor Holmes Norton, the representative of Washington, D.C. There, much of his work focused on affordable housing and D.C. statehood. He went to work as an attorney for Skadden Arps, one of the largest law firms in the world, during a time when he says he also volunteered to provide free legal services to federal inmates denied the right to continue their gender transition. 2008, when his wife got a job at the University of Minnesota as a professor and practicing surgeon, Melton-Meaux moved to Minnesota. He went on to lead global employment practice at St. Jude Medical, which is where he met a now member of Congress, Representative Angie Craig, who was then the senior vice president of global human resources for the company. Angie and I are friends, he said. Quote, we've worked together for several years, and I have a lot of respect for the work that she's doing in the 2nd District. I have to say that I do not. She is fairly centrist. She is very establishment. I'm not a fan of Angie Craig particularly, even though she seems to think I am because she's continually asking me for contributions. While Craig has not endorsed in the race, some ties between the two campaigns exist. Aidan Johnson, the former deputy finance director for Craig's re-election campaign, now works for Melton-Meaux. He has drawn endorsements from around the community, including several with prominent names: Josie Johnson, the famed civil rights leader, Nikema Levy-Armstrong, the former Minneapolis NAACP president, and Shep Harris, the mayor of Golden Valley. But Melton-Meaux has received the endorsement, okay, of Layla Shukri Adan, the previous candidate for the race and the co-founder of Axis Medical Care, a healthcare center in Minneapolis. In an opinion piece for the Star Tribune, Armstrong said that Melton-Meaux was too humble about his qualifications. It's evident that he has always, this is a quote, always been deeply invested in the success of the 5th District and will continue to invest the time, energy, and effort that it takes to get things done, unquote. She wrote, quote, the Melton-Meaux's humility should not get in the way of his stellar qualifications to serve as our representative, unquote. Well, his qualifications are fine. Now, may we get to his policy positions, please? Andy Lugar, the former U.S. attorney from Minnesota and another of Melton-Meaux's endorsers, said he's known Melton-Meaux since he first moved to Minnesota. I've known him and his wife since then and worked closely with him, and we practiced law together, and I've been a strong admirer of his, said Lugar. And I believe in his integrity and his ability to unite people, which is very important to me in a candidate. Lugar said the Melton-Meaux's candidacy is not about it's not about any particular label, moderate, progressive, or conservative. That means he doesn't want to commit as a progressive, right? I don't think that's it. I think with Antone, it's thoughtful. Oh, so progressives aren't thoughtful. Moderates aren't thoughtful. Conservatives aren't thoughtful. Okay, now I agree. Many of all types are not thoughtful, but there are some of all types, and I would argue many progressives, who are thoughtful. Anyway, it's thoughtful. It's listening. It's looking for ways to bring people together. And you can do that as a progressive, and you can do that as a moderate. Gee, I don't see a quote that says you can do that as a conservative. Well, I guess Mr. Lugar thinks conservatives can't be thoughtful. I think that Sagar and Jetty would probably object to that. Major supporters, when it comes to endorsements, Omar has the more prominent support, both locally and nationally. She has the endorsement of the 5th District DFL, the endorsement of her predecessor, Keith Ellison, both the in-state and national teachers' unions, major environmental groups like Minnesota 350, major immigration advocacy groups like the United We Dream, and progressive groups like Justice Democrats, as well as Representatives Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. Quote, Ilhan is one of the best organizers we have, unquote, DFL Chair Ken Martin said in an email to supporters early this month. Quote, last cycle, her team knocked on hundreds of thousands of doors and earned more votes than any new member of Congress and all but 7 incumbents. This not only put her in office, but also helped get us a Minnesota House majority. One of Melton-Meaux's biggest criticisms is on Omar's vote against the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, an update to the North American Free Trade Agreement. And, quote, it was a bill that was supported by the AFL-CIO, progressives at the table. I don't know what that is. And she was the only member of Congress in the Minnesota delegation, Republican or Democrat, not to support that vote. Despite Melton-Meaux's critique, the Minnesota AFL-CIO backs Omar. I think Omar was right. There was one thing in that bill that was good, and that was getting rid of the ISDS clause, except, of course, it's still there for use by the fossil fuel companies, the last thing we needed to be there for, and it still does very little to protect the rights of labor and the rights of the environment as well. It is a bad bill. It should have been sent back by the Congress. Trump should have been forced to renegotiate it. Melton-Meaux and Omar have also drawn support from very different donor pools of campaign donors. In other words, Omar was right about that bill. Now, that is a difference between she and Melton-Meaux, and that's a very important difference. Arguably, more, not just arguably, from my point of view, a more important difference than their differences, on Israel. With the advantages of being an incumbent with national name recognition, Omar had raised a sizable chunk of change by the end of March, about 3.4 million. She ranks 29th among candidates running for the House in the U.S., according to Open Secrets. Now, remember, this was written on July 10th. Then they say Melton-Meaux raised $395,000, or Gabe Schneider, I should say, says that he raised $395,000 through the first quarter of 2020. His donor lists include 2019 Minneapolis mayoral candidate Tom Hawk, former University of Minnesota presidents Bob Brunings and Eric Kaler, former U.S. Attorney in Minnesota Andrew Lugar, the Metropolitan Council Chair Charlie Zell, as well as former ambassador to Morocco Sam Kaplan and his wife Sylvia, who often donate to DFL candidates in Minnesota. His supporters also include some prominent people in business in Minnesota, among them James Hereford, the CEO of Fairview Health Services, and Marilyn Carson Nelson, the co-CEO of Carlson Holdings. He also has the backing of prominent wealthy donors from around the country, including John Gray, a billionaire, and the president and COO of the private equity firm Blackstone, and Seth Klarman, a billionaire hedge fund owner who has given millions to the Republican Party. Just on this article alone, we see, Seth Klarman. Seth Klarman is bad news. 92% of the roughly 390,000 Melton-Meaux raised from individuals during the first quarter came from donors giving $200 or more, compared to 8% from smaller dollar donors. Omar's campaign raised about a third of $3.3 million in donations from individuals who gave $200 or more, while the remainder came from small dollar donors. Her donor list is more national in profile, with money coming in from every state and large hauls from California, New York, and other states. Omar's list notably includes actors Susan Sarandon, Ben Affleck, and Bradley Whitford, and musician Bob Weir, a founding member of the Grateful Dead. Now we get to Israel policy. Have we gotten to environmental policy or to Medicare yet? I should say to healthcare reform yet? I guess not. Israel policy now comes in prominently. Anton Melton-Meaux has also received financial support from a group not commonly connected with DFL candidates. In the reliable liberal 5th District, at least twice over the last few months, a bipartisan group that includes a number of Trump supporters has come together over Zoom to talk about why Melton-Meaux is their preferred candidate. Why do you suppose Trump supporters would be in favor of Melton-Meaux, would prefer Melton-Meaux? The fundraisers have been put on by NORPAC, a nonpartisan group that supports hardline conservative policies in Israel. In other words, Netanyahu, the Yahoo himself. The group supported President Trump's move to remove the United States from the Iran nuclear deal and his action to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Wonderful. So the people who support these egregious Trump actions, these unjustified Trump actions, prefer Melton-Meaux. What a revolution. Of course, I don't believe in guilt by association. So I think we have to look at Melton-Meaux's policies. But still, it is interesting. Melton-Meaux supporters include Iris and Shalom Maidenbaum, two prominent Trump supporters from Long Island, and Howard Jonas, a telecommunications executive who has maxed out a contribution to Trump. A number of other Melton-Meaux supporters have been avid financial supporters of Republican Senate candidates like Ted Cruz and major Republican committees like the National Republican Congressional Committee. As of the second fundraising quarter of 2020, NORPAC has bundled $150,000 for Melton-Meaux's campaign, according to a report from HuffPost. Well, let us go along here. We have a quote from NORPAC, which talks about replacing Representative Ilhan Omar, a highly divisive member of Congress who has proven to be unfairly and repeatedly critical of Israel. Well, maybe we should have some instances illustrating her supposed unfairness. Now, she has been repeatedly critical of Israel, but a lot of people are critical of Israel. I myself have been critical of Israel since the 1970s, when it refused to settle with the Palestinians and return the occupied territories to them. I've been critical of Israel since that time, and since it allowed the settlements to proceed, which over the years have made a settlement between Israel and the Palestinians far, far more difficult than it was in the 1970s. And you could see at the time that that was going to happen. You could see that the Israeli government was turning right at that time and making a peace settlement virtually impossible at that time, or at least much more difficult. I've been critical of Israel since then. To me, that is when Israel turned to the dark side. Omar has said repeatedly that Israel's current government oppresses Palestinians. Well, I say that repeatedly too. Posting on Twitter last year that the government violates their dignity and rights. In a letter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, 12 members of Congress, including 4th District Representative by Betty McCollum and Omar, said that Israel's continued annexation of the West Bank would lay the groundwork for Israel becoming an apartheid state. Melton-Meaux would not go that far. Instead, he said that by unilateral annexation is inappropriate. The Palestinians have been searching for a homeland permanently for a long time, and I've been very clear when I've been asked this question that we have to do things in the United States and Israel included to not exacerbate difficult circumstances, like moving ahead with annexation on a unilateral basis, which harms peaceful prospects. What Melton-Meaux has to realize is that in one way or another, Israel had been moving towards a unilateral annexation since the 1970s. That's what the Israelis who supported and allowed the settlements had in mind. If they didn't have that in mind, they would never have allowed the settlements on what was then internationally recognized to be occupied Palestinian territory. Quote from Melton-Meaux, "It puts stress on the Palestinians. I don't think that's a good thing to do, and it minimizes the potential for Palestinians to come back to the negotiating table for really positive, constructive, long-term solutions." Well, you know what it minimizes also? It minimizes the potential for the Israelis to come back to the negotiating table for a really positive, constructive, long-term solution. Because what pressure is there on them to come back to the table to negotiate a peace? Once they annex Palestine, what could they do to make a constructive solution? In 2012, Omar said, quote, "Israel has hypnotized the world," unquote, which draws on tropes about Jews as hypnotic conspirators. And in 2018, Omar said Israel's influence is, quote, "all about the Benjamins," which is a reference to a Puff Daddy song to communicate Israel's lobbying power. Well, it may be a reference to a Puff Daddy song, but I am totally unaware of Puff Daddy's songs because I don't pay attention to Puff Daddy's songs. I'm sure there are a lot of Americans who pay attention to Puff Daddy's songs. I'm sure there are a lot of people from all groups who pay attention to Puff Daddy songs, but there are also a lot of people who don't pay a bit of attention to Puff Daddy's songs, and for them, all about the Benjamins is a reference to all about the money. It's not a reference to Jewish money. It's just a reference to money because Benjamins is a popular term for money in the United States because Benjamin Franklin, if you hadn't noticed, is on some of our currency. So I just thought at the time that she was making a popular reference to all about the money. But let us say that she was making a reference to the Puff Daddy song and was trying to communicate the lobbying power of Israel. Wasn't she telling the truth about the lobbying power of Israel? A few years ago, during the presidency of our last president, Obama, if you recall, relations were a little bit tight between the United States and Israel. And Netanyahu wanted to come here, okay, and the president was against it. He wasn't going to invite him. So if you recall, Congress invited him to come and speak to Congress, and he came and spoke to Congress and lobbied Congress against the foreign policy of the United States set by the President of the United States at that particular time. Now, wasn't the influence of Israel and the influence of Netanyahu at that time all about the Benjamins, all about the lobbying power that AIPAC has within our political system? And isn't this lobbying power about the money of right-wing Jewish people who make contributions to AIPAC and directly to the campaigns of numerous Congress people. Wasn't Ilhan Omar telling the truth? The article goes on. A large number of Jewish groups condemned Omar's words for relying on anti-Semitic tropes. No way did I think that was an anti-Semitic trope. And believe me, since my childhood, I have been extremely sensitive to anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic tropes. I have encountered anti-Semitism, and it is ugly. Now, fortunately, my life has been comparatively free from it. I've only had a few incidents in my whole life that I would definitely attribute to anti-Semitism. But I've been very aware of anti-Semitism because of my study of Jewish history. I think I know anti-Semitism when I see it, and I think I can recognize it when I see it. And I did not see an anti-Semitic trope in what Omar tweeted and in what she had to say thereafter. Now, this is just my opinion. But I think that what Omar is being subjected to is a lobbying campaign by people who oppose her because her foreign policy views on Israel and on relations between Israel and the Palestinians are views that they are dead set against, and that I personally am largely for, and many other Jews that I know are largely for. Now, I'm not going to speak for the Jewish community. I cannot do that. But I don't think that these wealthy Jews who give large contributions to Congress can speak for the American Jewish community either. And I don't think that many of the rabbis who agonize about Omar can speak for the entire Jewish community either. Omar. Melton-Meaux has criticized Omar several times for not establishing a relationship with the Jewish community in Minnesota. There needs to be a constructive, ongoing dialogue with their member of Congress, Melton-Meaux said of the Jewish community. And that simply does not exist right now. DFL State Senator Sandy Pappas, a state legislator from nearby St. Paul who is Jewish, disputed the idea that Omar is universally disconnected from her Jewish constituents. Now, I can't speak to that because I'm not one of her Jewish constituents. Quote, Israelis are not monolithic. American Jews are not monolithic either in how we view the Middle East, she said last year. I feel kind of frustrated that any time anyone is critical of Israel, that they're put in that anti-Semitic box, unquote. Now, this has been a propaganda tactic, of course, of the Israelis and of those who uncritically support Israel, for whom it's Israel right or wrong. I think it's been a propaganda attack. It's been a propaganda strategy and tactic of theirs for years to put people who are critical of Israel in any respect, any dimension, in that anti-Semitic box, but especially when the critics of Israel are critical of Israel's policy towards the Palestinians. Pappas, who has family in Israel, by the way, I have family in Israel too. I have no idea whether they would agree with me about this. They might very well not agree with me about this. I don't generally communicate with them, but I have family in Israel. I don't think I have any uncles left in Israel because they've died, okay, in Israel. But I have some cousins left. I know that. She added anyway, quote, I think she could be a little more cautious in her statements, but that's not her. She speaks truth to power. I don't think she should be more cautious in her statements. I support her because she does speak truth to power and because I think I can count on her to do that. Jeremy Slevin, Omar's communications director, criticized Melton-Meaux for accepting the donations from people who also support Trump. Quote, it is shameful that any Democratic candidate for the 5th District would accept funding from Trump donors or Republican donors, but it is even more shameful that they would take their policy cues from these donors. When asked about the donations, Melton-Meaux responded, quote, NORPAC is a bipartisan organization. They support Democrats and Republicans, and the reality is on issues of Middle East peace, it will take bipartisan efforts. I really believe that the Israelis and the Palestinians want the same thing. The Israeli leadership and the Palestinians do not want the same thing. I can't speak for the majority, okay, of Israelis, but since they continuously vote sufficiently for people who don't seem to want the same thing as the Palestinians, I don't see on what basis Mr. Melton-Meaux says that the Israelis and the Palestinians want the same thing. I don't think you can contend that off the voting behavior of the Israelis. As far as NORPAC being a bipartisan organization, it is bipartisan when it comes to Democrats and Republicans, but it is not bipartisan when it comes to progressives and conservatives in foreign policy, or neoliberals in foreign policy, or neocons in foreign policy. It's for the neoliberals, it's for the conservatives, it's for the neocons, and when it supports people who are Democrats, it's clearly because from their point of view, those people are the lesser of two evils. So Melton-Meaux is taking contributions from people who are supportive of neocons, okay, and also neoliberals, and inequality, and people who are against Medicare for all, and people who are against doing something about climate change, and people who are against student debt elimination and free college, and putting the financial sector of the U.S. economy in its proper place instead of the place it currently has in dominating the whole economy. Here are some policy differences. Besides differing on Israel, Omar and Melton-Meaux take different approaches to a few important democratic policy priorities. Omar is a supporter of the Green New Deal. As a major proposed package of climate change response legislation, while Melton-Meaux prefers to say the Green New Deal is aspirational. In other words, Melton-Meaux is not a supporter of the Green New Deal. He's not going to necessarily vote for the Green New Deal. He's not committed to the Green New Deal. Since the Green New Deal is one of the two most important policy areas we have, from my point of view, that alone disqualifies Melton-Meaux whether you agree with him on Israel or whether you don't. The Green New Deal is a matter of survival from my point of view, and increasingly the point of view of a majority of the American people. It is not aspirational, it is necessary. To say it's aspirational is to weasel word it out. It is to say, I don't support it, but I don't dare tell you, because if I dared to tell you, you would vote against me. Omar is a proponent of Medicare for all, which is the other of the most important issues facing the American people right now. Well, I said there were two. There's also three. There's at least three. And the third is whether we're going to become a fascist nation or not. But we will get to that. Omar is a proponent of Medicare for all, a proposed single-payer healthcare system. But Melton-Meaux prefers his plan, primary care for all, a plan that would increase access to primary care services to Medicare for all, which would institute a more comprehensive change to the U.S. healthcare system. Well, that understates the differences between the two. For real progressives, to be a proponent for Medicare for all is a litmus test. If you are not, then you are not a progressive. You cannot claim that particular label. What Melton-Meaux is saying, a plan that would increase access to primary care services, access. He's not even saying primary care for all would be free at the point of service. He's not even going that far. He's just another weasel worder. He's just another liar. Omar is a supporter of the Minneapolis City Council's efforts to dismantle the police in favor of a new public safety department. Melton-Meaux is close to that position, but instead takes a more reform-based approach. We're not going to eliminate the police. They have to exist. Certain things that they can do, citizens can't and shouldn't do. Omar is a supporter of the city council's efforts to dismantle the police in favor of a new public safety department. Now, clearly, the new public safety department is going to have people who enforce the law. They are going to be the new police. What dismantling the current department is about is dismantling the killer culture of the current police department in Minneapolis. They're going to eliminate the department. They're not going to eliminate a police. They will be in the new public safety department, that is, police will, presumably not the same police, but different individuals with different training, with different attitudes. Nobody is saying police do not have to exist in some form or fashion. The issue is the form or fashion. But we also have to think about how to reimagine this in a way that's consistent with our values and reflect our constitutional rights. I certainly think that Omar would agree with the last sentence. The issue is, what are our values? We know what our constitutional rights are, and we know they're being violated all the time. That's what we want to have stop, and that is what Omar is going to fight to stop. We know that about her. We do not know that about Melton-Meaux. In a similar vein, The Intercept reported that in 2015, Melton-Meaux wrote an op-ed for the Star Tribune arguing Black Lives Matter had gone too far when some protesters chanted pigs in a blanket, quote unquote, quote, pigs in a blanket / fry 'em like bacon, unquote. And in 2018, in the midst of the Me Too movement, Melton-Meaux penned a letter to the Minnesota Bar Association suggesting corporate confidentiality agreements were important to prevent brand damage that companies would receive from being accused of fostering sexual harassment in the workplace. I mean, this article is revealing the character of Melton-Meaux and where he stands. He looks very much like a 1990s version of Joe Biden, who happens to be of a different race. That's all. Melton-Meaux wrote that the conversation about systemic treatment of women in the workplace was overdue, but that if employers decide to settle a sexual harassment claim, it may expose their organization to the likelihood that it will be branded by the public and media as a harasser, the stain of which will be hard to remove. That is so much baloney. And the reason why is because there has been so much sexual harassment in the workplace that all of our large companies, every last one of them, have to decide sexual harassment claims. I mean, I would be truly shocked if there were even a single large corporation that's been in existence for any length of time in the United States that would not have multiple sexual harassment claims made against it that it has had to settle in the past. I mean, what kind of reasoning is this? What kind of person is this? Melton-Meaux stands by his criticism of the Black Lives Matter movement, telling City Pages Wednesday, quote, I'm an African-American man, and I've had encounters with the police myself over the years, but that the movement needs to, quote, build coalitions to be successful, unquote, and that you don't do that by making violent chants towards police officers. I'm not here to tell you or say anything about whether that chant was ill-advised or not ill-advised. I'm certainly not here to debate it. Okay, I think it's a false issue of no moment at all compared to all the murders committed by local police in this country over the years. It just doesn't stack up. It's not relevant. It's not important. As for the workplace sexual harassment piece, Melton-Meaux says the position he took in it was due to the needs of his business as a mediator, and that now he does support the banning of non-disclosure agreements and sexual harassment settlements unless they are requested by the complainant. Melton-Meaux's campaign has its own critiques of how Omar has operated in Congress. Several times he has criticized Omar's present vote on a resolution condemning the Armenian genocide, saying that such a vote is an insult to the Armenian community in Minnesota. Omar explained her vote by saying she does not object to condemning the Armenian genocide, but instead took issue with the use of the resolution as a punishment for the Turkish government, which had recently launched a military incursion into northern Syria. Well, I don't know why she was against a resolution which condemned, or which could be taken as condemning well, I just don't know why she took the position that she took. I don't know how she justifies that, but I think it is a minor issue. I mean, isn't it? Compared to the other differences between them. Melton-Meaux has also criticized Omar for lying about her relationship with Tim um, uh, with Tim Minette, one of her campaign consultants, whom she married during the president's State of the Union speech, writing in the Star Tribune op-ed. That doesn't work for us. Omar's campaign denied any legal impropriety in her relationship with Minette, a conservative legal organization. The National Legal and Policy Center filed a complaint to the FEC over the matter, but the FEC has not taken any action. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't seem to me a significant difference or a significant occurrence. It seems to me it's crap. He is representing people who want to get rid of her because she is in opposition to the policy, of Israel, and because she is in opposition to most of what those people believe. Here's the choice in August, or a section on the choice in August. Okay, Keith Ellison is in strong support, of her. And there are a number of quotes here that strongly support her. And he ends by saying, but I see no reason why she should not be returned right back to Congress where she is now. He says there's no perfect people in Congress. By definition of you being human, there are legitimate reasons to say you ought to do this, you ought to do that, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But I see no reason why she should not be returned right back to Congress where she is now. I think Keith put it well. He put it well. There is no good reason. Melton-Meaux spent most of his campaign trying to contrast himself with Omar, said people are ready for someone else. Well, that remains to be seen. He said the dysfunction in Congress doesn't get fixed overnight. It happens over time through partnerships, coalitions, and pulling in the same direction. They're tired of the politics of division and distraction. They're tired of ideological purity tests. They want someone willing to go there, work within the party, create space for collaborations and partnerships, even across the aisle. So bipartisanship. That alone ought to disqualify him for this particular seat. We do not need bipartisanship at this point. We have to move too fast on the Green New Deal. We have to move immediately on Medicare for all. We have to move immediately on half a dozen other issues as soon as the Democrats gain the presidency and the two houses of Congress. We need people working to pass bills that will solve problems. We don't need people working to have bipartisanship across the aisle. The Republicans did not work to have bipartisanship during their time in Congress. They passed what they could get through, and they got most of their agenda through, and everybody has suffered for it. When Democrats are elected to get a particular agenda through, they need to get that agenda through. If some Republicans want to vote for that agenda, fine. If they don't want to vote for that agenda, and they're in the minority, they can vote against it. We will not need their votes to get through. We will need to have Democratic votes to get through. However, now we need to see to it that they get through. Okay. I've taken a very long time with that. I'm sorry. I guess I was, it's taking me back to sharing this screen. I'll take the opportunity to remind you then, of my Patreon account, which is patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. Before I end tonight, I had a lot planned. I didn't get through with it because I got hung up, on Ilhan's thing. But what I'd like to do now is to share a more recent article. I think it's more recent anyway, from Vice. Let me see if that's being shared now. No, it's not being shared. Let me share that screen again for you. Okay, that's good. So this article from Vice says, Ilhan Omar campaign mailer accuses opponent of being in the pocket of Wall Street, quote unquote, and only quotes Jewish donors by name. Well, I believe this ad was based on some articles which only quoted Jewish donors, which only referred to Jewish donors. So, as Ryan Grimm said in a tweet today, it does not make the articles in back of the ad, anti-Semitic articles too. Was BuzzFeed anti-Semitic, in its article? Yeah, maybe the BuzzFeed staff, are anti-Semites too. Anyway, here's the article from Vice. Who was it written by again? Cameron Joseph. Who is Cameron Joseph? I didn't know. I didn't investigate. The mailer received by voters in the district last week and obtained by Vice. What date was this? July 23rd, just 2 days ago. This is not an old article. I want to thank Lauderdale for this article also, for referring me to it. I think it's a good one to illustrate the issues. The mailing leads with the headline, Can we trust Anton Melton-Meaux' money? Unquote. It accuses him of being in the pocket of the GOP, in the pocket of Wall Street, and in the pocket of the medical industry, and pulls various quotes from a Min Post article and a BuzzFeed article about his donors who have been attacking Omar. And it says, the only names cited in the mailer are Stanley Weinstein, a retired real estate executive from the Miami Beach area, who was the only on-record BuzzFeed quote. Also, billionaire Jonathan Gray, the head of the Blackstone Group, a private equity firm, and Seth Klarman, a billionaire hedge fund owner who has donated in the past to the GOP. All three men are Jewish. Both the Min Post and the mailer inaccurately refer to Gray as John, J-O-H-N, as opposed to John, J-O-N, which they should do if they were referring to Jonathan. But anyway, I know this because my son's name is Jonathan. And we call him Jon, John, right? None of Melton-Meaux's other donors are mentioned by name in the mailer. The only other quote with identifying information attached to it is from Michael. Quote, from Michael, a donor from Scarsdale, New York, one of the wealthiest and most heavily Jewish towns in the country. So, are we to assume then that Michael is certainly Jewish because Scarsdale has a population that is heavily Jewish? Is Scarsdale even a majority Jewish town? I don't know. I never looked, to tell you the truth. Now, the neighborhood I grew up in, in the Bronx, was a majority Jewish neighborhood. That's true. Scarsdale is a town and a village in Westchester County, in New York. As of the 2010 census, Scarsdale population was 17,166. Demographics, ethnic groups. Scarsdale is also home to a large and active Jewish population. Okay, I'm afraid I can't easily answer the question that I raised because I haven't been paying attention. I don't know whether Scarsdale is a majority Jewish town, or not. I note that the population of Scarsdale was less than 1/3 of the size, closer to 1/4 of the size, of the neighborhood in the Bronx that I grew up in. And by the way, we had a good many people in my neighborhood whose first name was Michael who were not Jewish. I just mentioned that in passing. But anyway, let's go further. So Melton-Meaux, by the time this article was written, remember the first article was written in early July. It's now late, in July. Melton-Meaux has raised an eye-popping amount for a little-known House challenger, $3.2 million. Remember, the last article quoted something like 326,000, something like that. Vice reports 3.2 million in the last quarter. The last quarter ended on June 30th. And much of that money has come from pro-Israel organizations as well as Jewish donors, some of whom have donated in the past to Republicans who work on Wall Street. Oh, wait a minute. That's what Vice says. So is Vice anti-Semitic too? I mean, isn't that what Omar's been saying? It's a common campaign tactic for progressives to attack their moderate foes for taking big corporate money. But by solely mentioning Jewish donors by name while painting Melton-Meaux as being in their pocket to do their bidding on financial issues, her campaign's mailer makes an argument that critics see as an anti-Semitic trope, especially in light of her string of controversial remarks about Israel. Look, this is all contextual. It's much worse than circumstantial evidence in a criminal trial. Okay. Her remarks about Israel may be controversial, but if you want to attack her remarks about Israel, let's talk about those remarks she made about Israel. Was she telling the truth? Are they justified? Are they not? What is really controversial other than just unpopular? What is controversial but not false? Is the case she makes against Israel or against the behavior of Israel? I don't think I've ever heard her advocate against the continued survival of Israel or its people. I don't think I've ever heard that from her in any of her particular statements. So just what is an anti-Semitic trope anyway? What is it other than some form of guilt by association or labeling? The mail piece has triggered a heated debate within Minneapolis Jewish community. Well, I suspect it has. Why would it be heated? Probably because a lot of Jews support Omar because she's all about justice for the underdog. And a lot of the Jews in her district probably support her for that reason. On the other hand, there are also a lot of Jews who believe in Israel right or wrong. And they probably oppose her for that reason. Look at the character of the comments. My immediate thought when I saw the mailer was, quote, here we go again, unquote. This had both implicit and explicit anti-Semitic tropes. What is an implicit anti-Semitic trope? If something is implicit, it cannot be a trope. A trope is behavioral. It's behavioral. Now, if you can show that something is logically implied, then that's another thing. If it's logically implied, then it's at least near explicit. It's implicit in what has been said. But if you can't, if it's just something you think is associated with anti-Semitism, I mean, where is the evidence? Anyway, this statement was made by Rabbi Avi Olitsky of the Beth El Synagogue in St. Louis Park, the center of Greater Minneapolis' Jewish community. Well, it may be the center of the community, but that doesn't mean that the community agrees with Rabbi Avi Olitsky. Olitsky, who publicly endorsed Melton-Meaux on Wednesday, said he was especially frustrated. So He endorsed a person who's not for Medicare for all. He endorsed a person who's not for the Green New Deal. He endorsed a person who's not for free college. He endorsed a person who's not for forgiveness of student debt. He endorsed a person who is not for Black Lives Matter. That's who Rabbi Olitsky endorsed. So why should we listen to Rabbi Olitsky? Quote, most disappointing were the presence of tropes that we personally discussed as hurtful, as offensive, and that I received the commitment not only would it not happen again, but education would take place to learn more as to why it's a problem. I am beyond dismayed that especially in the heat of the primary season, such nuanced hate still rises to campaign literature. Screw that. This isn't nuanced hate. Hate schmate. Hate schmate. These people are Wall Street. They are neoliberal elites who have exerted tremendous influence in our political system over the years to see that the poor and the middle class are disadvantaged and lose economic position and economic status year after year after year after year. None of those contributors she cited are people who work for social and economic justice. None of them work for climate justice. Why is this nuanced hate? It's just opposition to Wall Street, just opposition to neoliberalism, just opposition to the influence the rich have over our politics, such that we are no longer a democracy. What is wrong with Rabbi Olitsky? Where is his sense of social and economic justice? Olitsky has criticized Omar for some of her past statements, backed another candidate in her 2018 primary, and plans to vote for Melton-Meaux. Why doesn't Rabbi Olitsky go vote for, I won't even say it. But he's also publicly defended Omar in the past against racist attacks. Thanks. And here's the mailer. Oh, gee, in this mailer, I don't even see any. Oh, have I missed something? Where are the names in this mailer? I see Donald Trump's name and Mitch McConnell's name. I see Neil Gorsuch's name. Omar's defenders within the Jewish community bristled at questions about the mailer. And they say rightly, Ilhan's opponents have sought to paint her as anti-Semitic at every turn, even before she was elected to Congress. This is just the latest step in that, where the campaign is just speaking truthfully and honestly about opposition to its agenda and counter-movement against progressive change in this country, said Evan Stern, a progressive activist in the district who is Jewish and supports Omar. Yes, folks, Stern is a Jewish name. Quote, the people who don't want to see that are going back to this old attack on anti-Semitism. And it's tired. The Jews in this district are tired. It's bullshit. unquote. Folks. I didn't say it. Stern's exhaustion is shared by many members of the local Jewish community who make up only about 3% of Omar's constituents. Both her supporters and critics are wary of the intense attention her comments and their subsequent fallout have drawn to their small community, worried that it could fuel anti-Semitic sentiment. Oh, gee, come on. Many declined to discuss the mailer on the record because of how charged any talk of anti-Semitism is in the district. Why is it so charged in the district? It's because of the propaganda that those working against her have been spreading for years and years. So people need to discuss the mailer on the record. They need to see that there are Jews who support Omar and who recognize there's nothing anti-Semitic about her. This idea that given her past controversies, she and her team should have shown more sensitivity and known the mailer was problematic. The mailer was a direct attack on the Wall Street connections and the Wall Street friendly positions of Melton-Meaux. Are you telling me she cannot criticize that in a mailer? That is not one of the biggest issues in the campaign? That mailer wasn't a problematic mailer. It's the propaganda that's making it a problematic mailer. And that's what the propaganda wants to do. Make the mailer problematic. Don't give them the satisfaction. That mailer is perfectly in bounds. Let's hear Melton-Meaux reply to those charges. Let's see him give back the money. It wasn't sloppy staff work, said one progressive Jewish activist in the district who's voting for Omar. That's far too defensive, I say to that activist. He says, I don't know if it's intentional, but it's like, hey, you guys, you need to be double extra careful about this because there's a magnifying glass on this issue. No, you don't need to be double extra careful about this. You need to do the usual thing, which is speak truth to power. That's what you need to do. That Omar supporter said the mail piece had become the latest all-consuming conversation about the freshman member of Congress, saying they had fielded, quote, millions of calls about it in the days since the piece landed in mailboxes. Joel Rubin, who served as Bernie Sanders' outreach director, previously served in the State Department under President Obama, said the kerfuffle was much ado about nothing. I couldn't agree more. I've never met a Democratic candidate in the progressive space who hasn't railed against Wall Street today, the GOP and pharma, he said, pointing out the quotes were all from news stories and that used every named quote from BuzzFeed. Rubin said Omar would have faced even harsher condemnation if she'd attacked the donors for coming after her over Israel, and said he was much more bothered by Melton-Meaux's recent campaign communications. Antone puts out emails, this is a quote, equating Jewish donations to questions about Israel. Apparently that's okay. Quote, you Jews love Israel, that's what you care about, unquote. That's kosher, says Rubin. It feeds into this issue of dual loyalty that is deeply problematic, unquote, he said. He says, okay, Melton-Meaux has recently conflated support for Israel with support for the Jewish community. In a 10-yeared email, well, I don't think that email was 10-yeared. I mean, it was biased. It contained an implicit anti-Semitic trope. That is the dual loyalty trope. The tin-air email his campaign sent out earlier this week. But Melton-Meaux acknowledged the influx of major contributions this way. After asking rhetorically, quote, will the money you've received from the Jewish community influence your policy decisions, unquote? He replied negatively, outlining his disagreements with Israel's policies. If it's really negative, why don't you come out and say that you opposed the policies, of Israel in replying to recent protests in the Gaza Strip, where Israeli snipers took out, 57 Palestinians who were protesting at the fence? Are you opposed to that or not opposed to that? Are you opposed to the daily violations of the civil rights and civil liberties of Palestinians? As Melton-Meaux acknowledges, it's simply a fact that much, if not most, of his support are coming from national pro-Israel groups and Jewish donors. And we're expected to think that's not going to influence his positions with respect to Israel. In other words, it did not influence his statement that annexation would be inappropriate. The word is not inappropriate. Melton-Meaux, any honest person would say that the annexation of Palestine by Israel is illegal from the point of view of international law. It's not that it's inappropriate, it's that it's illegal. And any progressive would say that up front. And also add that it was as immoral as well. NORPAC and Pro-Israel America, a pair of hawkish pro-Israel groups that back both Democrats and Republicans, have combined to bundle nearly $500,000 for Melton-Meaux. That is really big money. The claim that wealthy Jews use their money to control policy and society is an anti-Semitic trope that goes back centuries, as is the charge that Jews have dual loyalty to their own country and their people, and so can't be trusted as good patriots, an attack that has grown in potency since Israel became a country. I think that paragraph is way, way biased. First of all, wealthy people of all kinds use their money to try to control public policy. Academic studies show this. They show they not only try to control public policy, but they have largely succeeded in controlling public policy. So why should wealthy Jews be different from any other wealthy people? Why is that an anti-Semitic trope? And while it may be, an anti-wealthy person trope, in the case of the United States, in this country, at this time, it is a true fact that academic studies have documented we are a plutocracy, if not an oligarchy. That's a fact. We have to face it if we want to get better. That's the sickness. Yes, there's an anti-Semitic trope that goes back centuries, but that doesn't mean that at this time, this is an anti-Semitic trope and not a fact that everybody must recognize. While they also need to recognize that wealthy Jews are no different than any other kinds of wealthy people in this respect. They want to control public policy in accordance with what they perceive to be of their interest. But the charge that Jews have dual loyalties, that's another charge. That charge is one that has to be documented by studies of individual Jewish people. Undoubtedly, there are Irish Americans who are very favorable to Ireland. Italian Americans, very favorable to Italy. Jewish Americans, very favorable and very supportive, of Israel. There are also Irish people who are very critical of Ireland, and Italian people very critical of some of the policies, of Italy. I shouldn't say actually Italian people, but Italian Americans who are of the ethnic origin Italian. That is not different with respect to Jews. Now, there are also Jews who support not only Israel as a country, but certain policies followed by the Israeli government over a rather lengthy period of time now. Now, I wouldn't say that those people have dual, that their loyalties are dual. I'm not saying that's impossible. What I am saying is that those people may feel very loyal to the United States and very loyal to Israel as a country, and they may also interpret their loyalty to Israel as involving support for the current group of people and policies that are running Israel. Would these people have the same degree of support for Israel if the socialists were to suddenly take over Israel and to reform the whole country? Somehow I doubt that they would feel the same way about Israel. Maybe they like Israel a lot better now that it's not as socialist as it once was. Maybe they like it better now that it's a country that in many ways is close to fascism. But that's a separate issue. I do not want to discuss that issue here. What I want to say is that the dual loyalty question is an independent question from the issue of wealthy Jews using their money to control public policy and society. And that it is an anti-Semitic trope, in my view, to claim that wealthy Jews use their money for this purpose and to imply that wealthy people of other ethnic groups don't use their money for this purpose, that wealthy Jews are somehow unique, okay, or atypical, or somehow inhuman because they use their money for this purpose. Wealthy people are going to act like wealthy people, whatever their ethnic group. I would even put to you that, if anything, wealthy Jews most probably have a much more active and operative social conscience, and are often much more supportive of social and economic justice causes than wealthy people from some of the other traditions are. But that's my view, and I freely admit it may no longer be true these days. It was certainly true when I was growing up, but that was a long time ago. Okay, I'm 81 now, and a lot of people have been thoroughly corrupted by billions and billions and more billions, okay, of dollars, whatever the ethnic origin of those people may be. Anyway, I've gone over all about the Benjamins thing, and I think I've probably said enough for you to know where I stand and what I think of these criticisms, okay, of Omar. I think they're transparent attempts to get rid of her because she's part of the squad and part, okay, of the progressive movement, and part of a movement that, if successful, is going to soon part many of their billions of dollars from the kinds of people who are supporting these particular ads. And it seems to me that their support, okay, of Melton-Meaux is there because he does not represent such a threat, and she does. But that is the motivation for their support, okay, of Melton-Meaux. That increasingly is his motivation for many of the positions that he takes. That he is part, or wants to become part, of the bought-off establishment. I believe that he is up to no good. Stanley Weinstein, the retired real estate executive, whose quote to BuzzFeed was included in her mail piece, said he didn't think the mail piece on its own was anti-Semitic, though he said her previous remarks and stances had made it clear to him that she was. Funny. I'm just as Jewish as Stanley Weinstein. I may very well know more about Jewish history than he, may very well have studied it for a longer time than he. And I say that her previous remarks and stances and her previous associations have made it clear to me that she is in no way anti-Semitic. She is so far from anti-Semitic. If people went after Jews in this country, she would be among the first to defend us. This in itself, no, but I find her anti-Semitic, he said when sent the mail piece. She is trying to capitalize on people that hate her. She is saying, quote, look at these kind of people, quote unquote. I don't think there's anybody in the Jewish community that likes her, in a business that likes her, Republicans that like her. Who's she choosing? This is natural stuff that she would say. That doesn't make her an anti-Semite. It does make her an anti-neoliberal. It does make her an anti-plutocrat. It does make her an anti-oligarch. It makes her all those things. In my book, that makes her very American too. Krasner and Gray, the other Melton-Meaux donors who were mentioned in Omar's mail piece, declined to comment. And Melton-Meaux's campaign didn't respond to requests for comment. So those are my views. I am anxious to see yours, so I will begin to consider them. Let me check my sound to see that it still remained where it's supposed to be. Yes, it did. Wonderful. I was worried there might have been a shift, an automatic shift. Catherine Class says, hi. Hey, Catherine, how are you? Evelina says, the same thing going on in the UK with Labour MPs. Evelina says, bad echo, Dr. Joe. I hope I fixed that when I found the problem that I fixed. Claudette says, keep getting kicked off. I don't think that's on my end. Johnny Garza says, hello, everyone. Kay says, Portland is going wild again today. Yeah, I meant to spend some time on Portland, but I got to spend some time on comments now. Kay says, hi, Steve and Johnny. Steve says, hi, Kay, nice to see you. Johnny says, told them to stop being so mean to you. Evelyn says, I have an echo, difficult to follow, Dr. Joe. Kay says, no echoes from me. Steve says, no echo here. Try going completely out and then coming back in. It's like an overlay of Joe's voice. I hear him twice. Kay says, all these corporates need to go ASAP. Kay says, try going back out and going back in. It'd be hard to stop your phone for a few minutes if you're watching on a phone. Kay says, I saw an interview with a progressive candidate from Delaware a while ago, running against Chris Coons for Senate there. Yes, I saw an interview with her today. What is her name? She looked like a Bernie-crat, talked like a Bernie-crat, was a Bernie-crat on Medicare for All and the Green New Deal and student debt. She looked like a great candidate. Her problem is getting her message out there because no one will have heard of her. No one will have heard of her. Okay, so she's already left. Steve hopes she can get back in. And Rob says, Sager is far more of a corporate fascist. He may be, but at least he thinks. And Rob says, hey, Yoda. And Rob says, how you doing? How you doing, Rob? Rob says, I don't think Republican voters realize they are the activists for rich people and corporations. I don't think enough of them do. Kay says, I heard from a friend in Germany today, and she bought into the plan-ademic propaganda big time, SMH. Told her I wanted no part of it, no part of it all. And Kay says, there were big protests in Israel today, too, against Netanyahu, laugh out loud. Evelina says, no, echoed now, glad you're back, Evelina. Steve says, yay, what did you do? And Evelina says, thanks. Kay, Evelina says, I did nothing. And Steve says, sometimes that's the best thing to do. Evelina gives a thumbs up to Steve. Steve says, this is not a time for cautious statements. Evelina says, interesting that AOC isn't being accused of anti-Semitism, but she's being attacked on the grounds of race, I believe, and gender, of course, like the other day with that Yoho guy. Yeah. AOC claims to have some Jewish ancestry back in her family tree. I'm not certain what that's about, but I think that she tends to identify with Jewish people somewhat. Now, that doesn't mean that she doesn't identify with the Palestinians. I think she does. Evelina says he knew he was thrashing a young Puerto Rican woman from the Bronx. Yes. Last time I looked, though, the Puerto Rican people. Well, I suppose they are people of color, generally speaking, because there's been so much mixing in Puerto Rico. The ancestry, okay, is mixed, of course. AOC came into politics because of Bernie, who was a Jew. Who was a Jew. Also, Ilhan Omar. No, I guess Ilhan Omar came into politics before Bernie really became very prominent, maybe. Evelina says they also hate Omar because she's a Somali Muslim. Yeah, I know. And by the way, none of those articles pointed to the religion, okay, of Melton-Meaux, did they? Because, I mean, it's, okay, I suppose, okay, he's not a Muslim because they didn't call him a Muslim. But he could have been a Muslim. Okay, and for that matter, he could have been a Jew. But I suppose he's most likely a Christian. Yes, there are black Jews. Evelina says sexual harassment right on the steps of Congress. Kay says sadly it happens everywhere and anywhere here. Not just here, but literally everywhere. Very true. Evelina says there. Laugh out loud. Evelina says no matter, Kay, strong women are here to stay. Kay says I sure hope so, Evelina. We need to run the world. Evelina says but along with men who respect gender. Deborah says, great talk yet again. Evelina says it gets intense sometimes. Evelina says he's horrid. Ali Velshi is going to be live talking to voters tomorrow morning on his show from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Should be good. Live from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Yeah, Ali Velshi is good. Evelina says, Melton-Meaux. Shame on him. Evelina says Melton-Meaux sounds like an implant. God. Charles Lovett says, so true. Anti-Semitism is a slur Zionist use as a trick to silence people who are for truth. Israeli scientists and these dual citizens, congressmen and congresswomen, are basically executing the Palestinian Holocaust in front of the entire world. We need to get AIPAC out of our federal government. We certainly need to minimize, well, I dare say getting AIPAC out of our federal government is a matter of getting big money out of our federal government. I think that will take care of the illegitimate influence, okay, of AIPAC. I think there's an aspect of the influence of AIPAC that can be legitimate, Evelina says. That's right, Dr. Joe, let us stay focused. Evelina says, why even listen to somebody who doesn't support the Green New Deal, okay, Medicare for all, the federal job guarantee? The rest is all nonsense. Carmen says, oh, good, you're still on. Hi, Carmen. Yeah, I'm still on. This is a long one. And Kay says, AIPAC advertised against Bernie. Now, you know what? That was an anti-Semitic trope. When AIPAC advertised against Bernie, the first Jewish candidate with a real chance for the presidency, they committed an anti-Semitic trope. I'm joking, of course, but I mean, anything could be called. No, not anything, but I mean, really, how could, well, I suppose it's the American Israel the Political Action Committee. It's not the American Jewish Congress. By the way, did the American Jewish Congress support Bernie, or did they support Biden? What happened there? Johnny Garza, an example of controlling a narrative in order to keep control. The sad part, it's easily done. It's easily done with money. It sure is. Kay says, even with some luck in elections, I wonder if we can ever get rid of all the corruption in this government. SMH. Kay, you do a lot of SMH. Kay says, too many people just refuse to see the corruption, let alone understand it. Deborah says, their British contingent absolutely took out Corbyn with ads. They did. That was awful what was done to Corbyn. Awful. Now, I don't think that Corbyn took a particularly intelligent position when he refused to commit. He should have committed to Brexit after the referendum. That would have been the democratic thing, to do. Had he done so, he might have had a lot better chance to win, because that issue would have been out of the way, and he could have fought it on horrible Tory economics. So I don't think he ran a very good campaign this time, a very smart campaign. But yes, their British contingent absolutely took out Jeremy Corbyn with ads. That was terrible. Kay says, yes, I know, Deborah. I was watching that too. Charles says, Dr. Joe is on fire tonight. Yeah, that really got me. I get so pissed off at these attacks, on Ilhan Omar. I mean, it's just so obvious. It's all about the squad. It's all about getting rid of the squad one by one. They hate Omar and Rashida and Presley, and AOC. And they are our beachhead into a new party for us and a new Congress. Please watch Status Quo's video on hero husband Anthony Martino and donate to the GoFundMe. Thank you. And Kay says, you should post the link in here if you can, Steve. Steve says, have you been to Israel, Doc? Steve, I've been to Israel once. There's a funny story about that. I'd been sent to Thailand in 1969 by my company, which had contracts for the support, of DARPA. It was DARPA then. And they'd been getting criticism because they were part of a counterinsurgency effort in Thailand. And they had only one social scientist as part of their effort. The company I was with, which was Cornell Aeronautical Laboratory, it was a division of Cornell University at that time. It was owned by Cornell University. at that time. They sent me to Thailand for a while because I was a social scientist. They wanted to send me over there for 6 months and take my family, but I wouldn't go because my son John was a highly premature baby, at that time, and I wasn't going to expose him to the climate, in Thailand, or to medical care, in Thailand, to any of that kind, of risk. He needed care here in the United States. In Buffalo, New York, they had a hospital at that time that was very, very good, in medical care for children. And I was going to have him there and have those doctors available for me. So I negotiated with them. And I got my 6-month engagement lowered down to 3 weeks. So they had me as a social scientist there for 3 weeks. And they had another social scientist there under contract, from DARPA, who was an anthropologist. So when I came back at the end of the 3-week period, I had to fly back. And the fastest flight, that I could get went through Israel. It landed, at Tel Aviv, and it was there for an hour or so, or something like that. And I had to rush to get the proposal that I'd worked on while I was there back to the United States. And so I couldn't stop there. I originally planned to stop and look up some relatives and get exposed to Israel. This was in, as I said, in 1969 or so. So it was before the war of 1973, but not before the 1967 war. And so the plane kind of landed in there, and I got off the plane to breathe, some Israeli air, one might say, and to walk into the terminal. And I found myself encountered by a security person, an Israeli security person, who was probably part of the Mossad. And he said, "You look familiar. Do I know you?" And I said, "Well, I have some relatives here. So maybe you've seen one of them, but I don't think we have ever met before, because this is the first time I've been here, and I'm only here for a very short stopover, the next hour." So he talked to me for 10 or 15 minutes, and we shot, the breeze, and it was a very friendly talk. But that was my one exposure to Israel, and Israelis in person. Now, since then, I've had exposure, through emails and participation, in list serve groups. And I think I've probably made a few friends over there through my activities, in the knowledge management field. But other than that, I've never been to Israel. Some of my cousins have, but I have never gotten a chance to go. And these days, I'm not sure that I would particularly like to go. During the 1960s, I would have been very interested to go to Israel, and to meet all my relatives. But no, I have never been personally there. Kay says, "Me too, Steve." Steve says, "We need to support the squad." We do. Steve, are you connected to Tim? Oh, whatever it is, group? If so, post in there. Avril says, I apologize for being so late. Did the convoluted go to Project Blitz trying to hang Ilhan? No. Steve says Doc is 81 years young. I'm sorry, I scrolled down too far. Here we go. I'm sorry, I caught up to it. I'll just be a few more minutes, folks. Avril says, I apologize for the Project Blitz. We got that. Conversation go to Project Blitz trying to hang Ilhan. I didn't mention Project Blitz, but probably what I've been talking about has been part of Project Blitz. And Charles Lovett says, Ilhan has universal health care and a federal job guarantee. America don't. Yes, Israel has a national health service. In fact, I think it's patterned on the English system, if I'm not mistaken. And their health care, is pretty good, and they've been a lot more successful than we have in containing the coronavirus. Kay says, great discussion again, you all. Avril says, speech track still delayed, but sound is excellent. I wonder why the speech track is still delayed. Let me see. Read it again.
Is that the only person that's happening?
It shifted my speakers again away from my microphone to the speakers in my system. When you get that, when you get the system speakers, that's when the echo comes. It's necessary for everything to go through my microphone. I don't know why it's been shifting automatically, but sometimes it does. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing your comments in enough time to realize that it's happened. But it's now 11:16, so by the time I see some comments, from 11:16, the echo should be gone. Kay says, Kelton is going to be on Rising next week. Avril says, where? And Kay says, Hill TV on YouTube. And Mustafa Hajamar says, Charles B. Lovett, and they got their money from the U.S. They got a lot of money from the U.S., a lot of foreign aid for Israel in those days. We still give them a lot, of military aid. Kay says they have single payer too. We don't. Yes, they have a national health service. I don't believe it's a single payer Medicare for all system. I believe it's a national health service like they have in the UK. And Mustafa says, AIPAC pay Congress and Senate to make rules in favor of Israel, and that is bribery. But technically, it's not. It's the normal bribery in the U.S. system. What they do is they contribute to campaigns of the Congress people, and the senators. As you know, that is perfectly legal. That is what everybody does. To end the bribery, what we have to do is to end the role of money in politics. That is what we have to do. And I can do a live stream on that. I've done them before. I know exactly how to do that. It's a project involving a few steps, but the first step would end things quickly. Avril says, great point. Anti-Semitic trope against Bernie. Avril says, damn it, autocorrect. Johnny Garza says, it's gotten out of hand. I think Aldous Huxley's book, A Brave New World, applies here. Johnny Garza says, that's great news. They have a huge following. And Charles says, I think America needs a progressive Labor Party, but until then, It's necessary for progressives to run and outsmart the corrupt DNC and run candidates through the Republican Party, since their elections are not rigged against the progressives. Well, but it would be even easier for the Republican Party to rig their elections against the progressives than it's been for the Democratic Party. So I'm not sure that's such a good idea. Johnny Garza says, makes sense. I was thinking today, okay, if people want to get rid of this floor system we have now, okay, the best way to do it is for one election, like 2020, the upcoming election, to vote against every Republican on every ticket in the country to totally destroy the Republican Party. Why do I say that? I say that because if that were done in every state, for every office, in every place in the United States, then shortly thereafter, the Democratic Party would split and we would have a progressive party. Because the only thing holding the Democratic Party together is the ability of the Democratic Party to point to a more evil party than they are. The only way out of that is to kill the more evil of the two parties, because that's the one that the citizens as a collective have the capacity to kill. Charles Lovett says, Dr. Joe, you're 81 years old. It is a complete honor that you take the time to teach and share some of your wisdom with us. Thank you, sir. Well, thank you, Charles. It makes me happy. It makes me happy to live stream. Steve says, Doc is 81 years young. Johnny says, no way, he can be 81. You look way too young. You look way too young.
Sorry.
Yes.
I want it to be 125.
Yeah, Bonnie says she wants us to live until we're 125. You look way too good for 81, not to mention your mind. Johnny says, young, that's it. Okay, Bonnie says, we're going to go on till we're 125. Joe, may I ask what your dissertation was on? Yes. Okay, my dissertation is called Political Conflict, a Theory and Analysis of 5 cultures, or across 5 cultures. Hang on a second.
Did you forget what it's called?
So, I forgot the subtitle. It's a Political Conflict, a Theory and Comparative Analysis in 5 Cultures. That's what it was called. The cultures were the United States, the UK, France, Italy, and if I remember correctly, Mexico. But I've even forgotten the 5 cultures now. I got my PhD in 1965, so it's been a long time. What I was into then was political integration theory, and this was about that. And let's see. It was the UK, Italy, Germany, United States, of course, and Mexico. And it was based on survey analysis, a secondary analysis of a major survey study that was done in these 5 countries. So that's what it was about. And it was about applying a theoretical framework dealing with the political integration problem, which is still very important for the EU, for example, and increasingly important also for the United States, because we really have political integration problems here. I mean, certain regions in the United States, like the South, just way, way out. I mean, I have not a bit of doubt that if the secession of the South in the Civil War had been successful, that the South would have become one of the first of the fascist states, just the South alone. The only reason why it didn't is because of the rest of the country. On the other hand, the rest of the country would probably be a lot more democratic. Charles says, those 1967 Israel-Palestinian borders, and today they probably have 20% of their land nation. Shame on humanity to allow this. Yes, of course. Evelina says, have you been to Latin America, Dr. Joe? No, I've not been to Latin America either. My thesis was in comparative politics, okay, in international politics. Okay, I have my PhD in those two fields, and I was focused on those two fields, and I expected to travel to a lot, okay, of places. All my traveling was completed by 1969, and since 1969, I have never had a chance to travel to any other country with the exception of Canada. Okay, that's it. I've never been to Latin America. And the funny part about it is that at one time I was considering becoming a Latin American specialist in graduate school. I was fascinated with Mexican politics, okay, and also Bolivian politics at the time. And I was very well read, okay, in both areas, as well as, of course, studying the political culture in Mexico in great detail from afar. I never learned Spanish, though. My second languages were actually French, okay, and Russian. I took them both in undergraduate school, and my reading examination for the PhD was passed in French. Avril says, it's Saturday night, why aren't you and Bonnie out salsa dancing? Because what would you guys do if I didn't come on Saturday night and live stream for more than 2 hours? And Kay says, that's what Bonnie wants to know. No, I don't think that is quite what Bonnie wants to know. I think Bonnie likes my live streams.
Yeah, I do.
And Kay says, I never vote GOP. Avril says, I hope the next economic recovery check comes on a card. Any word on that? No, but I hope it comes on a card too. It would be a lot easier. Oh, there's Bonnie. I think what she wants to do is put my thesis back in its place. Okay, honey, thank you.
Okay. I can't move it. I can't do it.
Okay, honey, just put it in there somewhere. I'll get it.
Yeah. Yummy theory.
Okay, anyway, to go on. The reason why I went away from international relations as a primary subject was because I became very interested in civil strife as a field, because that was going on here at this country. It was very important, okay, at the time. But by the early 1970s, the interest in civil strife was largely gone because of the Republicans' effectiveness in repressing the black movements then and the secondary effects of the Vietnam War. So basically, after the Vietnam War was over, most of the policy work that was being done here in this country was not on civil strife. It was on things like formula funding, okay, in the federal government. And by the end of the 1970s, I became very, very interested in microcomputers. And I spent most of the 1980s and the early part of the 1990s actually running a microcomputer company here, okay, in DC. And when that was over, the first place that I could find a job was in statistical analysis for a market research company. From there, I went into data warehousing, and from there, I went, okay, into knowledge management. And pretty soon, I was retiring, and I never got a chance to do any work in international relations again, except at one point, I did something on terrorism in the knowledge management area. And the National Security Agency, you know, the NSA, they're not very popular with us right now. But in the early, I guess it was in the early 2000s, they asked me to come in and to give them a talk on how knowledge management could be used in the anti-terrorism efforts. And I went and gave a paper there. And I don't think they liked what I had to say because they were never interested in talking to me again. So Bonnie and I are both laughing about that here. Kay says, I never vote GOP. And Steve says, Congress meets next week to decide. I think why Mitch McConnell wanted to go home was that he wanted to have his people check the home fronts to see just how angry everybody was. Really, to take the temperature of people in their various states, especially for all the senators whose jobs are at risk right now. I think he wants to get a reading from the home front, about whether they need to do something for us. Johnny Garza said, fixing steps. I have a website that addresses that. Now, I have nowhere near the mind of Joe, of course, but it's just me thinking out loud. The website is anactofdecency.com. Shameful plug-in here. Don't worry. It's okay to plug other things here. I don't get excited about people plugging other things here. I'm not threatened by you plugging your website here, Johnny. In fact, I'm going to go over there and take a look myself. Anactofdecency.com. That sounds wonderful to me. Avril says, deep stuff. Evelina says, comparative analyses are always interesting. Johnny says, thanks, Joe, for sharing the title of your dissertation with us. But maybe I can read it someday. Will I understand it? Probably not, but would like to try. Yeah, you'd probably understand it. I'm more understandable now, though. My blogs are better written than my dissertation ever was. There's no doubt about that at all. I was a little into the language and the technical vocabulary of systems analysis in the political integration field back then in the middle of the 1960s.
What was value theory?
What?
What was value theory?
Value theory, yeah, that was another thing I was into at various times during the 1970s. I love value theory, especially philosophical value theory. Still love it. I really did my best work in that area, but it never got published. I published an awful lot, but somehow the work in that area never got published. I had a book into John Wiley. They were considering it for 3 years before they told me no. And then somebody new took over the area I was dealing with, and they said, look, we cannot publish this book because it falls between two stools. Falls between political science, okay, and also philosophy. And there's no market there. Now, if you had written a book that was philosophy alone or political science alone, maybe we could have published it. But this one falls between two stools. And besides, the third of the reviewers, who was your most important one, hasn't given us a review yet. But even though we advanced him the money,
It's not your fault.
and my friend had never sent in his view of the book. I'm not sure why to this day, but I know that around this time, and maybe a bit later, he became very ill with cancer, and he died. It was fatal. That might have had something to do with it. So that was it, and that was the way that went. Kay says, I have often thought we should have let the South secede back then. Sadly, we'd be way better off now. Johnny says, I think you're right there, Kay. Well, it all depends. All sorts of things might have happened if the South had actually seceded and we had let them go. There might have been wars over the West. There might have been another result in California as opposed to what happened. We might have lost the West Coast, okay, as a result of that, much of the West Coast. Okay, no one can say what happened. There have been, though, alternative histories that have been written about this. Ward Moore's book, Bring the Jubilee, okay, it was called, but considered what would happen if the Confederates had won at Little Round Top, and their secession had succeeded, and it theorized that the Confederates would have gotten rid of slavery in another 30 years by themselves, that they would have moved down to Mexico and conquered Mexico, and that the Confederate States of America, as a result, would have become a great power, and the North, having lost the Civil War, would have become a backwater that was full of prejudice, full, of racism, and full, of poor people. I forget what the novel had to say about California, but it's a very, very good novel to read. It's a science fiction classic. And more recently, there have been alternative histories written by Harry Turtledove that are also very interesting and postulate a future in which the South had been successful. But in that alternative history, both the North and the South ended up as world powers. And that's a very interesting world, as well. And there are a number of books about that Harry Turtledove did, okay, about the Switcher. Very interesting books to read, okay, very imaginative books. So I recommend all these books to you about alternative histories, what had happened. The Civil War, it turned out a little bit differently. It's endlessly fascinating to speculate about that. And Charles Levitt says, I am never voting corporate Democrat or Republican ever. Greens and progressives will only get my vote, mine too. But never say never, because life is long and you don't know what's going to happen in 20 to 30 years.
You're still getting okays from years back.
I'm still getting okays
From years back.
from years back. What am I getting?
They keep telling you, people are recommending you.
Oh, you mean on the ResearchGate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Bonnie was talking about how I get a lot of reads, recommendations, ResearchGate, and that most of these are coming from the knowledge management work, actually, which I haven't done since I got deeply into politics in 2010. So I have a rating in ResearchGate. It's about 16.42, which is about halfway halfway through the rankings, something like that. No, I guess it's 16.48 now. It's about halfway through the ranks there. And I haven't done a publication, in knowledge management since roughly 2010. It's been almost 10 years now. But those things I did, in knowledge management, were mostly done between 1998 and 2010. And on academia.edu, I'm getting roughly 10 mentions every day for that work. Okay, so that's just incidental. It's funny. It's very funny. And when I was doing the work, I got almost no recognition. Now it's years later, I'm getting 10 mentions a day. I don't know how much it costs to get on the New York subway anymore. When I was young, we used to have a saying, that plus a dime will get you on the New York subway. I don't know what I need now to get on the New York subway, but those mentions plus that will get me on the New York subway. Kay says, I often thought we should let the South secede. Johnny says, I think you're right there. Kay Charles says, I never voted corporate. Kay says, we should have given the slaves a place to run to. Yeah. Avril says, do you think the recent coup against Bolivia to oust Evo was over lithium? In part. I think it was about there were a lot of different grievances that the rich white people in Bolivia had against the Indians, and that's what that coup was about. It was the first time that there was a government that was pro-Native American in Bolivia in the long history of that country. And so there were all kinds of interests that were still owned by essentially Caucasians with dollars. And they plotted against Evo, and they got CIA help for sure, and help from the companies that were still there, still exploiting Bolivia, in various ways. And I think lithium was very important in what happened. Evelina says, no, real integration is better a long time. Overdue. Russ says, I'm hitting the sack. See you again soon. Johnny says, fascinating. Dolores says, good night, Russell. And Albert says, you have a collection of pressed flowers in those books. It was my hobby before I got evicted, and my books got thrown into the streets and rain soaked during Irma. Oh, that's awful. Awful, Carmen. No, I don't have any flowers, any pressed flowers in the books. I don't do that. I used to go to Cleveland and protest the war and letting 18-year-olds the right to vote. I was 15. Johnny says, gosh, that's sad. Evelyn says, this is the problem. South and North could never see eye to eye. Can't have a viable republic get that way. That way, yes. And Kay says, I miss my books I lost when I lost my last home. I've been through how many rounds of a reduction in my books? Once, twice, 3 times. Yeah, 3 times now. Once when I got out of graduate school, and my first wife and I got a divorce. And then when Bonnie and I moved from our house into an apartment, we could not keep all the books. So we had a big sale and put a lot of them on sale. And very sad to see them go, but we had to do it. And then when we came here to our apartment, here, we had to shrink down to a 3-room apartment to save, on rent money. And now we have a combination dining room and library, and you're looking at a part, at some of the library here. I only have 4 book stacks here, and mostly the books are doubled on the shelves. The shelves are wide shelves.
Indeed.
So I can see roughly only half the books that I have. And when I want to look for a book, I have to pull out the first layer in order to get a look at the second layer. And in the bookshelf where my remaining science fiction books are, I have things in triple layer there. So and Charles B. Lovett says, one day I hope to hear what you was doing when John Kennedy was assassinated, and what were your thoughts on the Lyndon Johnson administration? Well, it's too long to say when my thoughts were on Lyndon Johnson, but I know exactly where I was when John Kennedy was assassinated. I was sitting in a room where the faculty and graduate students came together to play bridge. Mm-hmm. And I was playing bridge at the time. At that time, I played bridge. I haven't played bridge in years, but back then I was a pretty good bridge player. And I and other graduate students were playing with some of the faculty, and somebody ran down the hall and said that John Kennedy was shot. And I couldn't believe it. And everybody ran away to a television set to see what was happening to John Kennedy. And for us, at the time, it was very, very sad. My thoughts on the Lyndon Johnson administration, I'll go over some other time. But I have to say, in summary, in general, that Lyndon Johnson was a great domestic the president, is one of the greatest in our history at that. But he was a very poor foreign policy president. And a lot of his domestic gains were sacrificed to the impact of the foreign policy crimes that he visited on this nation. So that's my overall assessment. I think Lyndon Johnson was a tragic president, and that his relatively untimely death was due to, in large part, to the stresses and strains that he endured during his very difficult days as President of the United States. But Lyndon Johnson, for all his the vulgarity and all his faults, was a man of conscience who cared about the people, who cared about the public interest. He could have been a great president. He would have been if he'd been able to avoid the Vietnam errors that he made. Should have pulled out of there early on. Alvin says, so McConnell is using Trump's strategy to test the waters to see what they can get away with. He's just trying to get feedback. He's trying to see how far he'll be able to go without actually losing the majority. Kay says, my whole life has gone to shit in the last few years since my late hubby got cancer and died. Johnny says, you got a sense of humor for sure. Johnny says, oh, so can you put your books in audio form? I don't think I could afford that, Johnny. Oh, you mean the books that I've written? Can I put them in audio form?
Couldn't afford it.
I don't know. I probably couldn't afford to do that either.
Maybe.
But it could be that my knowledge management books are in audio form. In other words, the publisher may have put them in audio form. I have to check on Amazon and see. Steve says, I gave all my books to the library. I'm going minimalist. The least amount of possessions possible. You sound like my daughter, Steve. She also has the least amount. Avril says, and Steve says, yes, he does. Johnny says, I looked on Joe's page and didn't see it. Johnny says, that would be good. And Kay says, racism is still nationwide anyhow. Avril says, COVID is all of us in the house on a Saturday night. Thank the stars Dr. Joe is on, because it's sobering to have experience and knowledge right on our device, Avril says. Johnny says, right. Kay says, Avril, I used to be a people person, but most people have ruined that for me. Laugh out loud. Avril says, I understand. Avril, of course, is Carmen. So Carmen, I understand. Steve says, I gave all my books to the library. Yeah. Avril says, I love the feel of books. I just don't have any space anymore. I love the feel of books too, but my eyes now strain when I read a book. I really need to put on the readers, because they fixed my eyes a few years ago and ruined my capacity to read books with small print. Mm-hmm. So now I have to use these fine glasses when I read a book, and then I can't watch television and read the book at the same time, which puts a crimp in my current affairs consumption. So what I do now is I mostly read Kindle books. Actually, unless I have to go into my library. And I love Kindle books because I can make the type as large as I want. Kay says, I'm a master gardener and had a library of gardening books, not to mention my old yearbooks from high school and others. Carol says, and then MLK got shot, and then Bobby, and then Teddy Kennedy got involved with Mary Jo Kopechne. Okay, and there it was. Bonnie is saying, say good night. Say good night. But I am very close to catching up to you, so I'm going to do it. Charles says, thank you. Sorry to bring up that horrific part of American history. I had a signed long version of Stephen King's The Stand, my all-time favorite book. The Stand, sorry. Met him on the street in Wilmington, North Carolina. He signed it for me. Steve says, Johnson was involved in the assassination as well as George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush would have been very, very young then. The assassination occurred in 1963. Are you sure George H.W. Bush was with the CIA in 1963? I know that he headed the CIA later on, but 1963 was awfully early for him to have been involved in the assassination. About Johnson's involvement in the assassination, I really doubt that. I really do. He just seemed so shocked by the whole thing. He really seemed shaken and shocked. I don't think Johnson was that good an actor. Johnny Garza said yes. Evelina said wow. Steve said, I love The Stand. Let me drink something here. Johnny said, nope, I'm pretty sure I checked. Only format is paperback and Kindle. Charles said, that would be awesome, Dr. Joe. Audiobooks. Kay says, not anymore, Evelina. No space in this trailer park. Okay, guys. I'm trying, but I can't seem to catch up to you because every time I try, I scroll too far down. So I'm going to cheat a little, and I'm not going to read every one. I'm going to scroll down. And Avril says, if Barney says time for good night, then I will hush and wish everyone pleasant dreams. Hope to see you Monday night. Thanks, Avril. If the creeks don't rise, you will see me Monday night. Kay says, I might try if I'm still here next spring. This year has been awful weather-wise. And Johnny says, okay, you all, the clothes are dry and folded, and I have to start driving at 6 a.m. Wow. So good night for now. I'll listen to the end in the morning. God bless you all. God bless you, Johnny, too. I say that as an agnostic.
Thank you.
And Charles says, Richard Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover was in on it too, Secret Service too. Yeah. Yes, Doc, George H.W. was a young CIA officer, was in Dallas at the time. I've done a ton of research on this. I used to do a ton of research too back in the 60s, but I've kind of forgotten that. I haven't done very much reading about it since that time. I'll take your word for it, Steve. I'll take your word for it. Steve says, I don't think Nixon was involved. Laura says, good night, Johnny. Evelina says, that's a surprise. Steve says, Dulles and Hoover were definitely involved. Avril says, agnostic here as well. Okay. I sort of caught up. Thank you for staying here for so long. And I'll see you on Monday. Good night, all.